The following program contains strong language and flashing images.
Punk rock should mean freedom, liking and accepting anything that you like, playing whatever you want, as sloppy as you want, as long as it's good and it has passion.
The person said, you know, what do you call the type of music? And he said, grunge.
It was this little secret society.
You get so much freedom to just be as weird and out there as you want to be.
We're doing what we want to do when we want to do it, the way we want to.
And that's what everyone should do.
And that's what it's all about.
This conglomeration of people seeking something beyond what the music industry had been feeding them at the time.
You're not just capturing musical data, you're trying to make magic happen.
You know, Seattle created a scene and a network. There were record labels here, there were places to rehearse, lots of places to play shows.
We didn't know what we were creating. We didn't know what was gonna happen. We were just doing our thing. It was just pure energy.
The human side of those things is much more exciting than the mythological aspect.
It's a beautiful thing! It's a beautiful thing!
I like things to sound lively. I like it to have a spark. I like it to jump out at you. I don't like music that is boring. Of the 80s, the only way you could hear guitar-oriented loud hard rock was on your radio, and it was dominated by overproduced what we called hair metal bands at the time that basically came from the Los Angeles record industry. Grunge, I think, sort of came about somewhat organically here in Seattle, but I think it reached people outside of Seattle because it was kind of a reaction to this overproduced, somewhat syrupy pop music masquerading as rock and roll that was dominating the charts in the middle of the 80s.
For me, the word grunge is just an umbrella term to sort of, you know, make sense out of that time and place in music. There was no master plan. There was no real industry, so to speak. We had a few little record stores, a monthly newsprint magazine called The Rocket, and that was pretty much it. So at the same time, the bands were kind of experimenting, finding their way and sound, you know, initially. Maybe on a Thursday night in a little club with 50 people. I was at the same time with my photography doing that, finding my way. And it was great because I wasn't beholden to anyone. So I could just do whatever. I wanted to cut somebody's head off, or I wanted to, you know, just put my camera out in front of me and shoot away. So I was able to sort of develop my style. It is a bit of a miracle when you think about it. I don't know if miracle's the right word. It was just all very fortuitous, you know? I guess there was this really mix of luck and talent. And we all just, the fact that there were so many that came out of Seattle though, you know, is pretty amazing.
You know, there was a huge punk rock influence on Seattle, both musically, but also in the way of doing business. You know, just, you know, punk rock can apply to any style of music. You make the record on your own, you put it out, you either put it out yourself or you put it out on an indie label, and you get in the van and you go play shows. I mean, that's punk rock. There's no major label involved. There's no corporation. It's just you, the music, your band, and you go play shows and sleep in a van. When I was on tour with Skin Yard, with Jack and Dino's, one of the early grunge bands, we had this school bus van, which the engine, I rebuilt the engine because the engine had blown up. Anytime we had to spend the night somewhere, one guy always had to sleep in the van to just guard the equipment. So we rotated, and we get one hotel room and put 4 guys in the hotel room and 1 guy in the van. And that's when we got a hotel room. So most of the time we just stayed on, slept on people's floors and on their couches, friends that we knew from around the country.
Hi, this is Danita Sparks from L7, baby. L7 and a lot of the other early grunge bands were from the underground scene. That's years of rehearsing and practice and paying for your instruments and paying for your rehearsal studio, as well as keeping a full-time job or whatever kind of job you have and paying your rent. And also it's years before you even might get a gig. Then it's years of local gigging and then touring locally and then, touring regionally and then touring nationally and then touring internationally. So L7 took a very long time to get the little bit of fame that we got.
Suburban, middle-class white America, get ready for the most dangerous women in the country.
He started in '85. There was kind of a punk Hollywood scene that had a lot of different genres going on. It had roots Americana, rockabilly, hardcore punk, and stuff like that. But I would say that the sensibility from the guys in Seattle who were doing, early grunge stuff, it was more progressive, for sure.
When the whole thing was exploding worldwide, we're still in a little town. It feels very just local. We're here with a bunch of friends. One day we're over at Nils Bernstein's house drinking beer with the Mudhoney guys, the Nirvana guys, the Fastbacks band. Everybody's friends, everybody's hanging out. It was really a small town vibe here.
Seattle is a music town. Think back. We got Jimi Hendrix spirit here, how cool is that? In the 80s, because I was a photographer in Los Angeles, and I'm shooting, Guns N' Roses and, Great White and whatever, and Faster Pussycat and all them. And they're big hair and eyeliner and, oh, do I look good? And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, you look great. Click, click, click. And then you come into grunge and they're like, oh, I didn't even get my picture taken. And they wouldn't do makeup and they just wouldn't at all. And so I had to come up with this new lighting. I called it yummy lighting. And I would put a filter on the camera and a filter on my light so that they would look good without makeup. Why we call them garage bands is because we practice in the garage, that's for real. And why we wore flannel is because we were freezing in the garage because there was no heat. I believe the grunge movement was 300 to 500 people. But what blows my mind is the depth of talent that was in the 300 people that we're talking about. It was the Dave Grohls and the Kurt Cobains and the Eddie Vedders and the Chris Cornells. Clearly, we did not know it. We were just having so much fun. And we know that we love the music. We just didn't realize that the whole world would love the music. You would come here, like here to the Central or whatever, and you'd walk in and that would be Alice in Chains on stage. And I'm standing next to Nirvana. The next week, Nirvana's on stage and I'm standing next to Alice in Chains. And that is how the movement started, is that we had to support our bands because otherwise venues were not going to book live music.
moved to Seattle in 1987 and I started playing, I could hear right away that there was a new sound emerging. Being able to do that, being able to reinvent and create your own music, somehow, every generation has to do that. When you're 23, 24 years old, you're young, you have all this energy, and you have all these ideas that you want to express. I mean, you want to convey these ideas that are inside of you, and you just do it. There was something about Seattle, the fact that it was a little bit insulated from the rest of the country. You know, we're up here in the Northwest. When I grew up here, I mean, it felt like you were living in the Wild West. We didn't really have contact with other cities. So you have all these musicians in Seattle. Everybody knows each other. Everybody's playing the same, 5 or 6 clubs. It was a community. And that's the difference between a music scene and a city that just has a bunch of musicians.
I nearly lost you, and it's taking us somewhere. I nearly lost you. Well, let's try and see now.
The grunge thing came about because we suddenly had a couple of local entrepreneurs, shall we say, Bruce Pavitt or John Poneman, who decided they would try to start an indie record label. So all these things started developing at the end of the 80s. We started having Sub Pop, and there were other labels like CZ and Pop Llama and Empty Records. I'm probably forgetting quite a few of them. Sorry, everybody. So these little indie labels were starting to become viable. There was a national scene developing of clubs, sort of a touring network where bands could book their own tours and play like a small club in every city and interact with small college radio stations or independent record stores in each of those cities. So toward the end of the 80s, a sort of an ecosystem of non-commercial rock music began to develop organically all over the country. And I'm self-taught as a record producer, and I didn't have anyone to copy. I just had my own aesthetic really as a guide, and my memory of all the classic rock records that I had grown up listening to as a guide. There's a reason a lot of the grunge music sort of harkens back to the 70s in some ways, and that's because those are the records that those people grew up listening to, as did I. A lot of the bands wanted to make something raw, and I simply sensed it and did what they wanted me to do. At the same time, my music taste comes into play as well because I happen to like that kind of music. I like records that are not overproduced. So, obviously it worked synergistically.
In Seattle,
It did, so now
there's a law against grunge. Can't say the word. But we live it. We live it. And when we're here and we're away from Seattle, we say grunge. Every day we love to say grunge because we're free to say it.
My first day, I came to the Sub Pop office. It was super busy. It was really chaotic. And Bruce and John asked me if I could come back the next day. And I did. And they put me to work as an intern. So I stuffed some music, cat butt records, and they offered me a job being a receptionist. And I felt so lucky. I felt like I won the lottery. I totally struck gold. I got this job that paid me $5 an hour, answering phones, and I was in fucking heaven. I was so happy. I loved so many things immediately about Sub Pop. I loved all of the people that I met. I felt like I was around like-minded folks. People really cared. They were funny, they loved music, they were smart, they were curious, but also they were really good to each other. Like, they were good, kind people that really seemed to care for one another, and I loved that. But on top of that, the spirit in the office, it was a kind of creativity that I'd never experienced before. I wanted to be a part of it.
I really wanted to, portray that emotion and energy that the bands were projecting themselves. It could just be a club with 100 people in it, but if I framed it right and the audience was going crazy, it looked like, wow, this is just the most exciting thing ever. And, you know, Bruce and John from Sub Pop, they picked up on that early on, seeing my photography for the first time. Some of the pictures of the audience pictures were like stray dogs from every village, you know? Because you had this sort of gothy looking person, and then this punky looking person, and then this person that just obviously didn't care, and then a preppy person. So it was really more about this attraction of outsiders to this music that didn't want to, you know, hoof to a certain cliche of dress or whatever. And of course then it became its own cliche eventually. But at first it was, just this conglomeration of people seeking something beyond what the music industry had been feeding them at the time. My photographing of audiences, I guess, came from the fact that growing up in the suburbs, looking at magazines of the punk scene in England and elsewhere, the pictures that always attracted me the most was where you saw the club and the audience and you know, gave it this sense of time and place versus it just being about a celebrity or a star. So I wanted to incorporate that as well. You know, it really gives it more emotion than focusing on just the individual players. I really wanted to set the scene and what was happening. Here's L7, and you have to really look at it to realize what's happening. You know, the guy on the floor, and Jennifer's over him, and
Charles Peterson's photographs of the Seattle scene and of us really, I think, visually encapsulated grunge in the strongest way of anybody. I think, like, we visually had a little more style and than some of the bands. We were kind of a little more, a little weirder. But I've always appreciated a band that had style, like the Ramones, like the Rolling Stones. And we also had a sense of humor about our style. We just wanted the experience of being in a rock band. It was very unusual for women to be in bands and stuff.
You had the late 80s and you had those hair bands and you had Madonna and Michael Jackson and stuff like that. But if you watched MTV, a lot of the times, anytime you saw women, it was very sexual. And so then you switch to Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder. They would speak about equal rights for women and making sure women were treated well. And there's the famous Unplugged, and Eddie's writing pro-choice on his arm. It seemed to be a very big pendulum swing from women as this material sexual object in music videos to not only being respected and having their rights fought for, but their place as artists as just being just as valid and to being just as important. And I think it's one of the things that maybe gets glossed over in the discussion about Seattle and everything that happened, is that it was huge for female artists.
I think it was also very influenced by the scene down in Olympia, which was the Riot Girl scene, which was very political. The feminist, political, vocal thing was, you know, right neighbors to us, but definitely a different scene. But I think that also reverberated into Seattle. That was just my feeling, is when I became aware of some of that. I thought, yeah, this is not only the emotional honesty, but it's realizing that there's more that you can do with your music than just tell your own story. You can infuse it with messages in a certain way, but you can also use the fact that you've built a community and then connect it to political causes or things that are important. I think Pacific Northwest feminism, for example, is always about, if it matters to women, it should matter to men and to all of us. And then, of course, that cracks open other issues of sexuality. There was real acceptance of all sexualities. There wasn't a sense of it being hetero or even just guy music or girl music. It was music for all.
Kids are a lot smarter, I'm totally convinced. The average 18-year-old is a lot smarter than they were when I was an 18-year-old.
You think so?
I'm convinced.
In what way?
I wonder.
What kind of smartness?
They're just more aware. They're more jaded and cynical. They're more aware of injustice. They've learned from their parents' mistakes.
There was a lot of emotional maturity and a lot of really strong intellects and curious people, and people that were open to people that weren't like them, and were wanted to look outside whatever wherever they grew up. Like the whole thing with Kurt Cobain in Aberdeen or whatever. He saw that he was different from just the average people in his town, and he very much wanted to see the world and experience other types of people and other ways of thinking and broaden his horizons.
Kurt Cobain was a total feminist. He wanted to work with women, you know, and same with Chris Cornell. I mean, and their manager, Susan Silver, was a woman in a male-dominated industry in the 90s. And so in some way, I mean, I got gifted a really beautiful place, you know, to start. I mean, I ended up moving to Los Angeles, and that whole Me Too thing was alive and well down there. And I just remember walking out of this manager's office, and I was like, how am I ever going to get anywhere in Los Angeles? And so I moved back, you know, because I was like, I can't, I don't even know. You just asked me to do the grossest thing. I'm not doing that. And my career is not going to come from some corrupt person. And so I was like, well, I'm out of here. And then I come back, and then grunge takes off.
MD, is it legible, Chris? Sure. All it's in your handwriting. One. God.
Do I have to go like or anything?
Dilute.
Dilute.
Yes.
Dilute.
I want a dress. Wear this.
I want a dress.
He's okay. R.
We could turn these coats into mini skirts.
But no,
wait,
put a belt
you need a little
on.
mascara.
Yeah, I think so too.
Hey, there's something like that.
Nirvana broke down a lot of barriers, and I think when a band has a spotlight on them as bright as Nirvana had, and you have the power to really actually influence people and culture, it's pretty amazing what can happen when a lead singer who is a man decides to wear a dress and just say, fuck the world. I mean, this is what I want to wear today, this is who I am, and this is how I am going to be in the world. And for anyone else who thinks differently or is different or isn't normal, it's all okay. I mean, that's huge. And that is a fucking great message to send out to folks.
I will say that I think because I was brought up with left-wing parents who were politically involved, socially involved, you know, I kind of brought that sensibility into the band. And, you know, there's always been political swells in music eras. There wasn't really one going on when grunge hit, and we kind of helped bring that into vogue. Because I think a lot of grunge's legacy was feminism coming into the fold in music.
Did y'all sign the pro-choice petitions out front? All it takes is a signature.
So many women started playing and started bands around that time. And I think for a lot of young people, that was an era that they felt that they were represented in, because there was a lot of women representation, and there was some political activity going on, like Rock for Choice, for example.
I think that there was a very intense feminist ideology that the women that I knew had, and then especially with when we started Home Alive, that felt very militant feminist.
Are you comfortable talking about how Home Alive started?
Yeah, sure. Well, Mia Zapata had been found murdered on July 7th, 1993. The guy was still out there. We didn't know who it was, and the police were investigating our friends, and it was a real change of vibe. Valerie Agnew, drummer in 7 Year Bitch, a friend of mine, called me. She was on tour. I was working at CZ Records, the Gets Run CZ Records, and she said, "We got to do something. We got to get all our friends to get guns." I was like, I don't want a gun. It was really freaky, and we didn't feel safe, but we also felt really strongly that we didn't want to change anything about our lifestyles. And we liked going to clubs, and we liked drinking, and we liked being out late. So we all met at Valerie's house, all being about, I don't know, there was probably about 17 or 20 people who met at first. And we just had this idea that we have to do something. And we thought, how about we put on a show? And we can raise money at a show, and we can get enough money to have all our friends take self-defense classes. Some people wanted to learn how to, do jujitsu, and some people wanted to kickbox, and some people wanted to own a weapon. And so we just wanted to offer all of it and figure out how to, and it just perpetuated, and the community was really powerful in supporting it for the most part. But it was a mindset where people were looking out for each other and, making sure they were making good decisions for themselves, and they weren't walking down an alley late at night and by themselves. It was a big life change, huge life change. Listen to 7 Year Bitch, and they have that song, Dead Men Don't Rape. And my band, Danger Gens made a record called Life Between Cigarettes after Mia was killed, and all the songs are after Mia was killed. And so it was that, the ripple effect of that and what it did to us. So you can't just let, the world crush you. You have to rage, You have to fight back and take care of yourself and each other. There was very much a sense of taking care of each other.
Pull me out of this warm ground into that terracotta pot. Shove me in a closet and leave me.
Seattle in the mid 80s, just a decade prior, was ambivalent at best towards its local music scene. At worst it was really antagonistic towards it. But because of what happened in the early 90s in Seattle and the subsequent sort of media spotlight on the city, I think that really changed the way that we thought of ourselves as a city, of like one where it's like we can celebrate the music that's coming here. The bands don't need to travel to LA or New York or wherever to make it big. That it's like there's a viable something here that is worth being celebrated.
I came out here in 1999. I never thought I'd be involved in it or live in Seattle or, you know, have any sort of connection to it other than just being a teenager and just being a fan and just responding to it the way that the rest of the world did. I arrived, I think, a week before those WTO riots and the protests, and that was another introduction to Seattle and sort of the activism. There's just cops in riot gear on the street everywhere, and there's tear gas, and you're driving around, and it was kind of another perfect introduction to the city and to the atmosphere and to sort of what the people in the Pacific Northwest are passionate about and interested in. And it did end up impacting. It made me realize that I could, in my own artwork, address a lot more themes and ideas that dealt with serious issues and code that and put that imagery into artwork and discuss it. And it was great to have the guys in Pearl Jam encouraged. Anytime that I made artwork that had political ideas or that was controversial.
Expecting perfection leaves a lot to ignore. When the past is the present and the future's no more. When every tomorrow is the same as before.
I can look at like every poster that I've made, I remember why I made that image. But that was the sketch for that poster. And you can see that they're not really entirely the same, or I think you can even tell what's happening in the sketch. But it was just supposed to be this big waterfall that became much different. And you can see even like her face is really dumb and bad and goofy, and it gets changed. Like you can see the way that stuff changes. Like those are the letters, which would originally be pencils. So do the pencils first, and then print them out, and then do the inks, and then I bring it into Photoshop and then manipulate it and change it all around. And there's like the little, that stuff, which starts off as those, and then the elephants. Every time I see an artist that I like, I want to see their sketches. I want to see how it was crappy and then it got better. So to me, this is the most interesting thing to me are all the sketches.
Signed the radio station on in 1991. The first two records that were handed to me when I came into the station was Nevermind from Nirvana and Pearl Jam's 10. I remember the first time I really realized, holy shit, this is much bigger. We had a party for when Nirvana played SNL. And everybody was drunk and having a good time and out of control. The moment they came on the television, the room was silent. You could hear a pin drop because this was everybody's friends. You know, there's Kurt, there's Chris, there's Dave up on stage creating history. And it was I still get chills thinking about it.
Everybody was happy when somebody had success. It was great when Nirvana's record exploded. It was great for everybody because now, you know, and Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam and Nirvana both broke in 1991. Screaming Trees and Soundgarden had been making records for a number of years, but then all of a sudden we got our chance, you know, and Soundgarden had a huge record a couple of years later, and you know, we had a big record, you know, the year after Nirvana. So we all benefited from each other's success. So I'd say that's a lesson for everybody, that community and mutual support and kind of like being a cheerleader for somebody else is cool.
Great show. Check. How do you feel?
How should I feel?
Sorry about the years. Check.
We never played for that many people before. It's really something else. It's all just a crowd, and then you channel energy. And to play between Lou Reed and David Byrne and after Soundgarden and all these people that we've listened to for years, it's really something else.
Tell me, you look quite mixed up.
Look at these pictures. I'll show you these pictures. I'll show you why I feel the way I do. It's a little bit overwhelming to see this many people. I mean, I'm sure you've been looking at this all day. It's a lot of people. We're used to playing small clubs, you know. And we want to go back to playing small clubs.
After the Nirvana explosion and the Alice in Chains and Screaming Trees and Pearl Jam, there were a lot of industry people here, and they were scouting the clubs to find the next big hit. And that started changing the vibe, because it went from a very a feeling of friendly camaraderie to oh, we have to play that slot because there's going to be an A&R guy here. A lot of bands got signed and dropped, and a lot of hearts were broken. A lot of dreams were shattered. And the dreams that were shattered were dreams that before it happened, nobody would ever admit having. And I think that was a big part of that era. You know, it was all like kind of against corporate music and against the macro culture. It wasn't against it, it was just in opposition to it somehow. You know, it was just, this isn't for me. We're doing this over here. And then the spotlight came on, and oh, maybe I really do want to be a rock star, you know?
First it was kind of exciting, and then it was kind of weird because there was a lot of things that happened where some bands got interest and some bands didn't, and then there was jealousies where there never used to be jealousies, or bands would kind of maybe try to morph their style, like, oh, they want that, they want that grunge scene, and we're not quite that, so maybe we have to do that. And when you have a scene that's sort of unadulterated and there isn't a sense of an outside world that wants that but not that, there was a lot of variety in the scene, and things kind of got more homogenous as there was more people coming to look at the scene, because certainly everybody wanted a little piece of that action.
When youth culture becomes monopolized by big business, what are the youth to do? Do you have any idea? I think we should destroy the bogus capitalist process that is destroying youth culture by mass marketing and commercial paranoia, behavior control. And the first step to do is to destroy the record companies. Do you not agree?
When all of that happened, the world changed. We had news crews constantly in Seattle. Like, fashion changed. Like, music and art changed the world. That's a weird thing to have happen in your backyard. And it was traumatic for people like Kurt Cobain, for people like Eddie Vedder, for people that were in the middle of the fucking spotlight. You know, be careful what you ask for. Eddie's talked about that. He wanted to be a rock star, and then all of a sudden, he was the biggest rock star in the world. And those pressures, you gotta rethink things. You know, those pressures are pretty intense. And clearly they got to Kurt.
For all of the wonderful things that happened, we had all kinds of tragedies, you know. As we talked about, a lot of people died, and it was horrible. I mean, it's absolutely the worst thing when one of your best friends that you wrote songs with, that you had, you know, made great albums, maybe even had hits with, and they die. They died young, before they were old enough to really reflect on the work they did. You know, they did the work and then they passed away. So that's why I wish people like, you know, Kurt Cobain and Lane Staley and Chris Cornell and Ben McMillan from Skinyard and some other people I know, I wish they were here now to reflect on the work they did and how much it meant to the whole world. The other side of it, though, is that, you know, they do live on in the music. Those are their voices. You know, those are their words. That's the message that they left for everybody else. And I mean, in a way, it's not any different than reading classic literature. You know, those were the words of the great writers, the great poets, you know, the great singers and the great musicians. You know, they left messages too.
And how do you see Nirvana in 10 years?
I see us on stage playing dorky clothes and just totally wrinkled and just like trying to relive our past and trying to remind people of the good old days, how things used to be, you know, cruising in your car or, you know, smoking pot and listening to music. Hey, those were the times, you know. It's called Children of the Revolution, 20 of your greatest hits by Nirvana.
I feel like there was a lot of focus on the dark side of what the movement was, for sure. I mean, people talked about drugs all the time. People talked about depression all the time. People talked about the loneliness that the weather will bring because it's rainy and people are indoors, and so they're maybe a little more isolated than some other folks. But, you know, all of those things did exist, but nothing is black and white in the world. And, you know, along with all of those things, there is also joy and happiness and great shows to go to and sunny, beautiful Seattle summer days. And I think also so much time has passed that people have a perspective now and they can talk about it in a different kind of way, you know, and with emotions that have been processed. So, yeah, it is a little different. But yeah, it truly impacted people's lives in such a profound way. But people don't always talk about the lives that were saved. And there were so many in the process. I mean, music is everything. When I was a teenager, grunge didn't exist. But when I was a teenager, I was a punk rocker. And music and punk rock was my lifeline. I mean, that was my saving grace, that was my sanity, that was my community, that was everything that made me feel like I mattered in the world. I mean, it really, really was a lifesaver for me.
If we don't have that, what have we got? We're just cogs in a machine, you know, working for a living, eating, sleeping, dying. You got to have art. And music is a participatory art. It takes place in real time with real people. It's social, it's communal, it's loud, it's fun. There's no rules. There's nothing like it. That's what I chose to do with my life. And I know the importance it has because I was a very depressed teenager. I was not happy. And music was kind of a refuge. It was a focus for me. I could concentrate on something artistic that was intensely interesting to me, which took my mind off a lot of, you know, dysfunctional things going on with me with, you know, at school and so forth. So I think I understand that. Music is important to me as life force.
90.3 KCMU Seattle.
KXP was KCMU back then. When I was on the radio, there was no internet. I kind of had a captive audience. You know, all these kids listening at home while they're doing their homework at night. Radio became a center for communication. When Kurt took his life, we hired counselors to be on the radio and talk to people, taking calls live on the air from people that were depressed, people that didn't understand, people that also felt like they might want to take their own lives. Those counselors also answered the phones off the air and counseled listeners. And they were there for days. He was a tortured soul, for sure. And he was singing about stuff that people could identify with, that a younger generation that had been tired of bullshit could identify with.
When the Nirvana exhibition opened up, we had one room that is no longer part of that experience. But one room that had an area where you could go in and you could actually sort of tell your Nirvana story, and it would give you little prompts like, "What's your favorite Nirvana song?" or, "What did you ever see Nirvana?" Or we had like maybe a dozen sort of question prompts, but then it really allowed the visitors to kind of tell their own story, which we kind of internally called the Nirvana Confessional. There were a good number of folks, mostly individuals that had seen Nirvana like during the height of grunge, and were sort of reminiscing on those experiences. And then a lot of kids that were like in middle school that had never seen Nirvana live, but were, still clearly Nirvana and Kurt Cobain had a huge impact upon them. I think with popular culture vectors, you have something that starts in the underground and it goes to the mainstream. And it either stays in the mainstream and, gets sort of embedded in our popular consciousness, or it, subsides back into the underground again and is kind of forgotten. I think with, a band, say, like Nirvana, where Kurt Cobain passed away at 27, it's frozen in time. And turning, him almost into something more than human, I think there's something in that kind of cements things into the popular consciousness for generations. The exhibition is really focused on the humanity of that band, and to me, it's the most fascinating story is this idea that this is a story about, some guys that didn't have a whole lot of opportunity, but with a lot of talent and ambition and luck, they became the biggest band in the world.
I think the legacy is music as a way to express everything and to be honest and to open yourself up to others. And the legacy is of, I think, fearlessness, but also of saying things that are important. There's nothing trite about it. It's music that is heartfelt and is trying to connect with people and be extremely emotionally open.
I can feel and listen to music from younger people that are hearkening back to some of the guitar tones. A lot of young people are always going to feel attracted to that, that sound, that guttural, down at the, the lower part of your solar plexus, kind of feeling of music.
Bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Mudhoney, the bands that we now consider to be classic Seattle bands, those records, they hold up after 30 years. When those records came out in the 1990s, I didn't have an email address, and then much later I got a cell phone, and I would start to get emails from fans around the world, and they would say, "Hey man, I just want to say that Mad Season album, that saved my life." And I would write back like, "Man, that's awesome. Like, I'm so happy, Ultimately, it's a healing device. When you're 22 years old and you're full of anger and you just want to play loud rock and roll, you're not necessarily thinking like this is going to heal somebody. Maybe it heals yourself. Maybe it allows you to get something out or say something that you need to say to heal your own soul. But as the decades have gone by, I've seen how it actually has healed other people, and I think in pretty profound ways.
Once we started getting a little bit of attention, I was like, oh, I'm on a fucking mission. And then we all became aware of being role models. We were very proud of that we helped people gain strength in some little way to get through their tough teenage years. And women in particular, and homosexuals and trans kids. So we usually sign autographs near our bus as we're departing the show. And people will tell us very nice things or a short story about how we affected them.
Seattle is so good at erasing its history, and you know, I think there's been such growth in Seattle over the last 20, 30 years that Seattle today is unrecognizable compared to when Pearl Jam 10 came out. We try to celebrate that history and preserve that history by collecting that material, that ephemera from those times.
Save your predictions, burn your assumptions. Love is friction, right for comfort. Endless equations, entire persuasion. Doors open up to interpretation.
I don't think we would have a museum like this without, what happened in the early 90s. We wouldn't have a thriving music scene like we do now. We wouldn't have a thriving all-ages music scene. But, 50 years from now, I'm hoping that this will continue to be a resource for people to access and to dig into.
Punk rock will never die, because punk rock is angry kids. There's always going to be angry kids, always going to be upset teens, upset at school, upset at the status quo, wanting change. That's a part of being a teenager. So yeah, kids are still going to get that. Kids are going to get that energy. How do you not?
How you doing, Seattle? I'm John Richards from KEXP. I couldn't be more honored to be here today with all of you. All right, you guys ready for some music?